the fit and trim athletes that they are today. I mean, that took some, that doing that flip into that turnbuckle took some effort, and my God, I don't know how he survived it, to tell you the truth. With that, I guess when WWE started invading different territories and taking their talent, of course, at the time, Hulk Hogan was a huge, was probably the first one who started this big defection. Of course, at the time, Hulk Hogan was working at for Vern Gagne with the AWA, and he got drafted by Vince McMahon and then the WWF, and then it just seemed like a train of people leaving both leaving both the AWA and then also the NWA at the time. The list of names were just unbelievable of this talent that was leaving the regional pools to go to Vince McMahon's I don't know if you want to call it show, circus, whatever you want to call it, but it was kind of sad, and I really found myself not really liking that product at first, just for that reason, because for one thing, you could start seeing something happening even back then. One of the things that was nice about pro wrestling back in the 60s, 70s is that you would see these guys come to small venues, high school arenas. I saw a couple different times where they had wrestling cards at high school gyms, armories, places that, lucky if you could seat 2,000 people, but it was a raucous crowd. It was a lot of fun. Probably not a lot of money involved, and it is a business, I guess. And you could tell even then when Vince McMahon started started that big push and started to get all this big talent, you knew even back then that you weren't going to see wrestling of that caliber. You weren't going to see wrestling anymore in gymnasiums anymore. You weren't going to see it in little arenas. They were, you're talking about Madison Square Garden, Boston Garden, Philadelphia Spectrum. You're into Chicago, the Rosemont Horizon. These bigger, they were playing to big arenas, and and let's face it, it just got bigger and bigger. I mean, they look at how many people they packed into the for one of the WrestleManias. They packed in somewhat of 70-some thousand people for one of the WrestleManias. You knew that it was an end of an era, in a sense. Now, does that mean that these days that Vince and the WWE, doesn't put out a good product? They, for the most part, do. But one of two things that have really changed in wrestling, in my opinion, over time, of course, the one thing is the emphasis on the big, bulky, huge guys that are muscled up and have just ripped physiques and what have you, and a lot of the dependency on steroids and other types of performance enhancing drugs and what have you. But the other thing is that the emphasis on everything had to be a car crash. You've seen over, especially in the 80s, late 80s, into the 90s, you saw a lot of this with tables, chairs, ladders, and a lot of this I blame on the wrestling fan of the day. People like to see car crashes. It's just that simple. What they don't realize is even as much as you can choreograph this stuff, these are real hard bumps that these people are taking. I mean, I don't know how many people have actually had an opportunity. I, back a few years ago in Vegas, had an opportunity to work as a ring announcer for a small promotion in Las Vegas, and I got involved in one of the little quote unquote storylines. At the time, the one of the wrestlers that was coming in, I was pronouncing his name wrong, I believe is what it was. I did something wrong. Well, anyways, I let him shove me to the mat. Now, I'd never done anything like this before. You know, I'd always wanted to get into wrestling, but at the time I wanted to get into it, it was such a big booming business. I couldn't afford what wrestling schools were charging at the time. But I took a bump. You know, I got shoved down, and I tell you, the back of my, I landed on the back of my head and my neck, and at the time didn't feel it, but the next day I woke up and I was stiff, man. That was just, that was just from one stinking push down, or one bump to the mat. And my God, I never felt anything. I for a couple days I was sore as hell. And that just leads me to wonder, how do these guys do it? How do these guys take the punishment that they take? And then you wonder why some of them are on painkillers and on steroids and other anti-inflammatories and what have you. You wonder why that they get in this stuff. I mean, look at Chris Benoit. And I'm going to wrap up after this because I've already taken about 25 minutes of time and half my hard drive to produce this particular rant. But you take a look at Chris Benoit. If you paid any attention to any of his moves, that jump off the top rope with that headbutt of his, and he would sacrifice his body night in and night out, and you'd wonder, I mean, this is still real, man. I mean, it's not real in the sense as of real competition, but these guys are really flinging themselves from the top rope and the top of a cage. From these are real. This is real impact, and you wonder how these guys, can handle that. And I am sure that painkillers, I am sure that anti-inflammatories are abound in this profession. And I would just hope that eventually that wrestling would kind of dial it back a little bit. Obviously you want some excitement and whatnot, but you have to understand that you cannot go, the body cannot take just constant impact, continuously. And you're seeing more and more of these guys get hurt all the time. You got Cena that's hurt. You got Bobby Lashley's been out for a while. Edge Adam Copeland, Edge just came back. I really wish and would hope that they would dial some of this stuff back a little bit. I still think it could be entertaining. Maybe use a little bit more of the mic skills and whatnot to put over certain angles. But not all of us out there are looking for these sick car crashes, and I wish the guys that were in this profession, I wish them the best. It's still very entertaining stuff. I just wish that they would just cut it back a little bit and preserve their bodies. That's it for this rant. As you can tell, this is one of my favorite subjects. I could go on and on about this, but that's it for this rant. Folks, you have a great night, and we'll talk again. This is the Redneck Cabbie. Adios.